Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience. My name is Sabrina Whitman, and I am the coordinator of Indigenous Affairs. So tonight is our last session of 5 sessions for the Indigenous Speaker Series that we are having this month. And of course, we're leaving the best for last. So these sessions were funded by the province through Community Culture Heritage, and they are an aspect of decolonization on campus. So they connect to the President's Advisory Council that existed several years ago. They listed a number of recommendations to the President to respond to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. So this activity is one of those actions from in terms of decolonizing or the campus and indigenization on campus. It also directly connects to Acadia's Strategic Plan 2025. What this series is about, though, is a partnership between Glooscap First Nation and Acadia University. So an MOU was signed in 2019 between the university and the community that actually created my position. I report directly to President Ricketts and to the Mi'kmaq chiefs in the Annapolis Valley region. And so this activity or this series is a reflection of that partnership between the community and with Acadia First Nation. So the series so far, the first ones first spoke about Nadumalik and Two-Eyed Seeing, which is a Mi'kmaq concept of understanding sustainability. We talked about regalia and powwow making, or powwow regalia and powwow dancing, and protocols around powwow. Then we talked about the history of two of the communities that surround Acadia University, so Glooscap First Nation and Annapolis Valley First Nation. And we also talked about place names. But tonight is a really exciting session. It's talking specifically about culture and racism in sport. And we have an amazing guest speaker here this evening. She is Mohawk from Ganawage. She was an Olympian, she's an activist, she's a broadcaster, and I have to read a little bit about her and then I will talk about my personal relationship with her. But in addition to all of her successes already as an athlete, in 2015, she was named one of Canada's most influential women in sport. She's also been an ambassador for Nike for their Native American initiative, which is Nike N7. And then in 2019, she was inducted into Canada's Sports Hall of Fame. For me, she is one of my mentors. She's an inspiration and a role model to me. And I secretly wish that I could be her little sister because she's such a phenomenal leader, not only towards women and Indigenous peoples, but for all Canadians. The last time her and I really got to connect or talk, I was in Ottawa in March of 2020, the first weekend of March, and we were hoping to see one another. I was in town for what's called the Inspire Awards, and I said, don't worry, I'll be back in town in a couple weeks and I can see you then. And then the next weekend, everything shut down in the country and across the world. So I haven't really seen her since, except on social media. So I'm so excited for everyone who's tuning in this evening to hear from her. So I'm shortly going to hand the floor over to Waneek. She has a bit of a presentation, and then at the end we'll go to Q&A. So if you have any questions, just throw it into the little Q&A box, and then I'll act as a moderator at the end. I do want to note we're having some technical difficulties, so if there's a little bit of challenges with the PowerPoint, just have some patience with us. As we said earlier, patience is a virtue. So we're spreading that to everyone else. And thank you to everyone who's tuning in who are football fans, because I know you may want to watch football, but this is way better when you hear her really inspired. So I'm handing the floor over to Waneek.
Hey, everybody. I am so honored to be here. I mean, you know what? I actually got a chance to be at Acadia. Was it 2 summers ago? I got a chance to be there, and what a beautiful part of the world that you all live in. I'm currently home. I've locked my bedroom door and I'm held up in my bedroom to spend a little bit of time with you. And I can't tell you how honored I am to get a chance to round out their speaker series. And I want to acknowledge that I've been invited by Acadia, but also Glooscap First Nation. I always have been raised to remind myself and everybody of the longstanding treaties of alliance that we have with the Mi'kmaq people as Mohawk people. And that was really came to the forefront during the Oka Crisis, when the Mi'kmaq people sent so many of their warriors to be there with us. So I always acknowledge that, and it's something that is as relevant today as ever, is coming together and standing with each other. So you know, I'm getting a chance to talk about something that I'm really passionate about. Really, really excited to get a chance to discuss this stuff with you. I did share a little bit of a statement. I was hoping to share a paper that I wrote talking about cultural space and sport. I'm doing my master's degree in Indigenous Studies and Kinesiology at UBC, and I'm, you know, in kind of looking at Indigenous motivation and the issues around that, as well as Indigenous involvement in sport. So I can't wait. I know that there's a few coaches on here and different people that are interested in sport. So I would love to get that dialogue going and discuss that. But first, I want to share a little bit with you. For those of you who have don't know who the heck I am, and I can't believe I didn't introduce myself yet. My name is Waneek Sunshine Horn-Miller, and I am a Mohawk woman, Bear Clan woman from the communities of Ganawage, where I was raised, and Oswegan, or otherwise known as Six Nations, which is near Brantford, Ontario. And I'm currently residing in Algonquin territory in Ottawa, and I'm a mom of three. Sabrina outlined a little bit of my background. Olympian, broadcaster, worked at a university, worked at McGill for 6 years, doing similar stuff to what Sabrina does, but she's way more influential in Acadia than I ever was at McGill. But I learned a ton, and I really value education because I have two sisters that are really, really involved in education. One is a associate provost of Indigenous Affairs at Carleton University, and my other sister is a doctor of medicine. And so very, very much an inspiration to me, but also an area in which I really am passionate about. So let's get down to what I'm talking about. What am I here to share with you? It's always very humbling when I get asked to share my story, because I sometimes feel like, oh my God, I'm not old enough. I don't know how many of you guys feel like that out there. I'm like, I'm not old enough. I sometimes look at myself, I'm like, I'm not old enough to have 3 kids and all this stuff. But you know what? I think that's because I'm still a kid deep down inside. But I have been through things, and I'm realizing more and more in my academic career that those things are really relevant, and what I've been through, the experiences I've had, I need to talk about them, because they will help. They will help find solutions, and the solutions that I found to get through these things in my life will help others. So when I talk about, please shut the door. No, you have to shut the door. No. Please shut the door. Shut the door. Okay, my son has figured out how to pick my lock. So give me 2 seconds. I have to go and lock that door. Oh, hello. Anyway, so talking about, getting back to, sharing these experiences, I am an Olympic athlete, and I'm the first Mohawk woman to ever go to the Olympics. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that I was the most talented athlete out there, Indigenous athlete, but there were things put in place before I was even born, before I even came to this world, by my people, that allowed me to be able to achieve my goals and my dreams in sport. And so my mom, who we're going to talk about here, and I'm hoping I can change the screen here, and it doesn't seem to want to change. How about Natalie, do you want to change the slide for me? Oh, I'm going to request control again. All right, here we go. So my mom, I was raised like you'll hear many Indigenous people talk about having a parent that went to residential school. My father went to residential school, but my mother didn't. My mother went to day school. And my mom was raised quite a bit by her grandparents. So I'm really lucky because my mom is a fluent Mohawk speaker. And she always talks about how language is so important, in not just because we often say to kids, oh, you should learn your language. You should learn your language. It's important you know your language. But kids are like, oh my goodness, learn my language. Like, here's their life over here, social media, TikTok, all that stuff where they live, where they socialize, they understand the world through sort of that, even more now through this pandemic where we're all online. But what my mom always told me is like, if you want to understand how our people think and feel and were inspired and saw the world and dealt with things, you have to know our language. And so she says, when you get a chance, you need to teach people about those words and have them understand it. Then they'll understand us a little bit better. And so this word has always been a really powerful word within my life. And if you pronounce it's like really long, Ganerunquatsara. So Ganerunquatsara is the most I'm gonna say click next, is the most it's the most powerful energy in the world. And it's so funny because you'll often hear Indigenous language speakers say that English isn't a sophisticated enough language to really encapsulate what these words really mean. But loosely translated, this word means the power of love, that positive well of love that is there, that we have. And she would say, Waneek, when you're making decisions, make decisions based on love. And I was like, what? And she's like, you come into this world and you only really own one thing. You can buy lots of stuff but that can all be taken away. Your body, your mind, your spirit, that whole being of yourself, that's you, that's yours. Creation gave that to you, and you need to protect it. You need to make good decisions based on Ganarungwatsara, from that well of love, that well of goodness. And so, when I was a little kid, I thought, oh, you should just try to get me to eat my like veggies. I thought she was trying to get me to drink more water or go to bed on time. But when I got older, I understood it differently, especially when I hit my teens, and, I don't know about all of you, but when I was a teen, I was a bit of a punk. It was the late 80s, early 90s. And I was like, I had this penchant for the bad boy. I was like the most doomed looking guy with the darkest cloud over his head. That was the one I wanted to date because I was going to fix him. That was my plan. I was going to fix this guy and it was going to be all good and I was going to love him. And as we all know now that I'm in my 40s, I understand that you really can't fix anybody but yourself. And they need to take that. And I remember when those relationships would kind of fall apart and devolve into, as all the horrible things that you can think of as a teenager, I would have my head on the lap of my mom and I'd be crying and I would just feel so horrible and so hurt. And she would just say one thing to me. She would say, Waneek, are you showing Ganarungwatsara? Are you showing love for yourself by letting him make you feel that way? And it was like the most simple statement. And it made me understand that I had control over how I let people treat me, number one, and that I could make that decision to walk away from those situations. And you know what? This concept of Ganarungwatsara would be something that would follow me through my life, help me make really, really hard decisions on my way to the Olympics and beyond. And so when you're understanding, Ganarungwatsara, there is also, the understanding that making those decisions based on love also kind of multiplies that love and helps you, and it keeps your spirit and it keeps your mind safe. It keeps you calm, that sense of calmness and wellness and balance. And you'll often hear a lot of Indigenous people talk about balance. A lot of ceremonies, from my understanding, in our cultures are about rebalancing. They're about balancing, right? And so when something's off, that's when you need to have ceremony to rebalance all the things in your life. Well, the power of anger is really strong. It's very strong. Anger, hate, so it's so powerful, and it can overcome you, as we've seen, right? We've seen that recently, where it's kind of collectively taken control of groups of people. But my mom would always say, you know, being angry, it can be that fire that gets you up and going. It can get you out of complacency, but don't stay in anger. You need to go back to love, because if you stay angry, if you stay in hate, it'll turn to hate, it'll turn to resentment, and that resentment and hate will suddenly start to take over every thought and every emotion you have. And it's like a cancer. And the only person it ends up hurting is you. So she would say, you know, get angry. You have a right to be angry, but you have to find your way back to love. Find your way back to making decisions based on love. And so you can see how this understanding of love and hate and anger is something that seems really kind of, you know, wishy-washy, but it's very, very important when you're a young person trying to navigate the world, especially a young Indigenous woman trying to navigate a world where where I came up with it face to face with so many things like hate, like anger, like all of these things. And what do you do with that, right? So I'm going to get you to go to the next slide, if possible. There's one more. All right. Okay. There I am. Oh my gosh. Almost 21 years ago. I can't believe it. This is me playing at the Olympics. And it is in the best game of my career. So often as athletes, you'll often hear them say, oh, I remember, they can almost pinpoint that like almost magical game. And it was against the United States, which we always love to, you know, battle. There's always a little extra energy in every athlete from Canada to fight the Americans, because there's just always that good rivalry and all of that. So, but this game, the reason why it was so good is because I scored a hat trick. And it was just, I won every swim off and all that kind of stuff. And if there's any water polo players out there, they'll know what that means. The funny thing about behind this picture is really funny, because everybody always likes to know what's behind a photo or what happened at that time. Well, you'll see my bathing suit. So for those of you who know anything about water polo, we're an aquatic sport. Obviously, it doesn't involve horses. We don't hurt horses. It is an aquatic sport. And we are not like synchronized swimmers or divers or any of those people who wear these cute little numbers with spaghetti straps and everything like that, because we're a contact sport. And our suits are generally these really high-necked, ugly numbers made of polyester mixes. Why? Because we want them not to be able to be ripped, right? Because, like, you know, we're being grabbed. And I wasn't a very big water polo player. Like in my career, I'm only 5'8". At my most muscular, I would think I was 165. You know, that was like almost 20 pounds of pure muscle. Like, it was so funny because everybody would say when they saw me go to the Olympics, I had no neck, and like, you know, my abs I didn't have a 6-pack, at an 8-pack. Like, I was jacked going to the Olympics. And, but I wasn't big, because my sport is an awesome sport because it's full of women of all shapes and sizes. And the bigger you are, almost the better, more powerful you are, right? But in this game, these suits that we got, but right before the Olympics, the Speedo rep said, we have a special suit for you guys. We made it so that you can't be grabbed. And for someone's kind of on the smaller side of a water polo player, this was key for me, because I was like, oh my God, if they can't grab me, then I can do so much more, you know? And I was a counterattack specialist. I was one of the fastest swimmers on the team, all this kind of stuff, right? So this suit that they gave us was made from neoprene. And I don't know if you guys know what neoprene is, but it's like that wetsuit material. It's rubbery, slippery on one side. Well, it was slippery and had a little mesh part underneath the boobs and to let the water out, and was kind of all designed. It was like, and he's like, here you go. Here's 2 suits. Well, we're going into the biggest tournament of our lives. It was going to be like a bloodbath. We knew that. Everybody wanted to win the first ever Olympic gold medal in women's water polo. And we knew that. And so our suits were like looking at these 2 suits. And like in general, I would go through between 3 and 6 suits in a tournament in like world championships. Ripped, they would just get ripped to shreds and stuff, right? Anyway, I'm like, oh my God. He goes, oh, don't worry, don't worry. You'll just wear one and you'll have a second one as a like a souvenir. And I'm like, okay, this guy's telling me it's not going to be ripped. Okay. So then we're playing in this game, and we have a shot clock and water polo, a lot like basketball. And my job when on defense was, okay, as the shot clock is going 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, I kind of work around my player, get ready. And as soon as they either shoot the ball or the shot clock ends, I like grab my player, kick, push off, and I get an advantage, swim down the pool, totally open, hopefully get the ball and score. That was my job. So I'm getting ready, shot clock's going down. I grab the player, kick, take off swimming as fast as I can, head down. I have my head down and I'm like what? I feel like my suit is filling up with water. And I'm like, what the heck? And I stop. And the entire front section of my suit is missing. And I look back and the American girl has the entire section. She had grabbed my suit. I guess it's where there's a will, there's a way. And she had ripped off the whole front of it. So we didn't get a chance to stop the game. I had to keep playing, whatever. I didn't score a goal at that time. Our coach calls a timeout, sees that I need a new suit. He says, throws me a suit, says, get out, change. I'm like, there's nowhere to go because it's like fans on all 4 sides of the pool. There's cameras everywhere, lasers everywhere. I'm like, I can't get out. So he says, we only have 30 seconds. So then all my teammates gather around me and I quickly change my suit, finish the game, thinking nothing of it. Well, I didn't realize that every night on Australian television, there was a special show on this late night comedy show, and it made fun of the Olympics. And their favorite footage was the underwater cameras at the water polo pool. So I did not realize. And that night it was like the Australians and their awesome humor were like, look at this naked girl. And thank God I didn't put my head underwater. Like if you see I'm wearing a hat, like a hat, we have our number and our name on it. I didn't put my head under, so they had no idea who it was. But so it was the most amazing game of my career, but also the most embarrassing probably game of my career as I was, naked on Australian television. Anyway, this dream, and I talked about how many things were put into place for me to be able to realize going to the Olympics. Raised by a single mom. She, my mother, I think this dream started even when she was young and even when her parents were young, of giving opportunity for our people to achieve their greatest potential. And I need to talk about my mom because most times you hear about Indigenous people, how they, how many of those dreams started before they were born. And this is my mom. So for those of you who do know who she is or don't know who she is, it's totally fine. My mom was born in 1940. She was born in a time when it didn't matter if you were Native or not. The expectations of women at that time were you maybe finished high school, you found a husband, got married, you had children, you made a home, right? Post-war, all of that. Well, my mom had a problem with that. My mom's 80. She's going to be 81 in April. She still can't handle anybody telling her what to do. She was fiery. And she became, one of Canada's first Native rights activists, because not only as an Indigenous woman was she expected to have this very stereotypical role for women, there was also the added on layers of what it meant to be an Indigenous person at the time. You needed a pass to leave the reserve. If you got a university degree, a professional degree, you lost your status. If you served in the military, you were no longer Native. They didn't have the right to vote at that time. And Indigenous women, if you married a non-Indigenous man, you became a non-Indigenous person. So these were all layers that were laid on top of an Indigenous person at the time. And not to mention the land issues and all the stuff that was happening. You know, this was the civil rights movement in the 60s that was kind of exploding all over the world. And my mom became very active in that. And she's known for a few things. Like I don't know how many of you guys are raised by single moms, but my mom is old school. Like she would tell me all the time, I am not your friend, I am your mother. And that was like the prelude to some sort of, you're in big trouble, girl. Like it was this, I have to make this decision. And so my mom had to raise me with a little bit of fear, I guess you could say that, because it was really hard to raise 4 daughters. And I remember opening up my social studies textbook in grade 7, and there's my mom in there. And she's known for a few things. One, and it's really awesome, if you want a chance to take a look at this, you can actually watch it online. But in about 1960, I would say 68, there's a Mohawk community that straddles the Canadian-US border. It's called Akwesasne. There's about 13 to 16,000 people that live in that community. But not only does it straddle the US-Canadian border, it also is half in Canada, half in Quebec, half in Ontario. And so there's something called the Jay Treaty. And the Jay Treaty is a treaty that states that our definitions of our borders predate that of the US-Canadian border. So we're allowed to travel back and forth. Hence, a lot of Indigenous people can go down to the States and get a social security number. We can work in the States. That's due to the recognition of the Jay Treaty. Well, at that time, you know, they were supposed to be allowing just people to go, you know, just to go visit a family member on the other side of the community. You had to go through an international border, and they were harassing people and all this kind of stuff. So for some reason, they just chose January, and this massive bridge, they decided to blockade it. And it was freezing cold. And there's a film that NFB made called You Are an Indian Land. And it's a black and white film showing this blockading of this bridge. And there's my mom, you know, I'm not even a glimmer in her eye at the time. And she's up there. And my mom is tiny. If you look at her, she's not a very big woman. So my mom was a model at the time of Twiggy. Twiggy, if you know who she is, she changed the face of modeling. Where it used to be like a Marilyn Monroe size 12, well, Twiggy was like a size 0, tiny. And my mom was considered a heavy model at 115 pounds, 5'6". And there she was getting arrested and shoved in this cop car in this big fur hat. And she got charged with assaulting 22 OPP officers. But you know, another thing that she's known for that actually ties into my life is about the same time in the mid 60s. So each community, Indigenous community, had what you call an Indian agent. So the Indian agents made all the decisions in the community. And this Indian agent, so Kahnawake is we're like right across from Montreal. We're on the south shore of Montreal. And we're surrounded by like 33 municipalities, all over the place. Well, he signed an agreement with 33 of them to dump their garbage in our community. So this dump, it was like a money-making agreement. And my mom said, you know, it was fine in the beginning, you know, when people would dump like linoleum and and then everybody would have new floors, right? Or there would be, you know, old antiques that people would find. I think we still even have a table that someone dumped out. My mom dragged it out of the dump and refinished it. She said, but as this dump grew, so did the rats and mice. And there began to be these rats and mice that started to run through people's homes and bite people, and really unhygienic. So then the complaints started, and the Indian agent was like, sorry, there's nothing we can do. There's a 99-year lease. Well, I don't know if you guys know anything about the 99-year leases amongst our people, and often with non-Indigenous people, it's like the bane of our existence because we wouldn't be able to get out of them. And so my mom was like, well, what are we going to do? We have to get this dump moved, right? So my mom said, okay, at the time, she was one of the most well-known Native women in the country, a Native people. And she says, I called up Indian Affairs, and I told the deputy of Indian Affairs, I said, I want to do a I want to do a cultural sensitivity training seminar with you. And the deputy minister at the time, of all names, was a guy named John McDonald. And he goes, awesome, awesome. Yes, Conjanetta, please come down to Ottawa. We would love to have that. What an honor. Like, yes. So my mom, in the months leading up, like weeks leading up to this meeting, her, my Uncle Frank, a couple of their great aunties, they live trapped a whole bunch of rats and mice. That's not killing them, that's keeping them alive. But my mom caught a special rat in her home. It died. And so, but she put it in this like special Ziploc and she put it in her fridge and let it kind of marinate for a couple weeks waiting for this meeting. So the day comes to go to Ottawa and they gather up these rats and mice and they stick them in a bag and stick them in a box. My mom grabs her special one and puts it in her purse. Go in a car, drive to Ottawa, go into this beautiful meeting room. And there's the entire kind of top executive of Indian Affairs, you know, and their secretaries. And they're all sitting there patiently waiting. Oh, Conjanetta, thank you so much for coming. My mom didn't know how to do cultural sensitivity training. I mean, this is the 60s. Nobody knew how to do anything like that. And so she's stuck on a movie. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the movie called Nanook of the North. It's a famous NFB film about Inuit, I think filmed in the 1930s. Actually turns out that it was all staged. And it was just, they all sitting there watching this old black and white film, and those old NFB films where it was like, you almost can see like the disappearing native, you know, like how the guy talks. Anyway, movie ends. The deputy minister is like, oh, thank you, Conjanetta. I feel so sensitive. Thank you so much for coming. And he was trying to like say like meeting's over. And my mom's like, no, wait. I want to talk about what it's like to be an Indian on a reserve right now. And I brought something to show you guys. And, you know, she says, Frank, you know, bring the box over here. So he comes and brings the box, puts it on the table. And my mom pulls out this rat and she takes it out of the bag and she starts talking about the dump. You know, would you have this next to your house? Would you feel if your kids, is this because we're Indians? And, you know, just giving them hell. And she's shaking this rat around. Everybody's kind of, ugh. And my Uncle Frank always loves to tell the stories. Like, then your mom was wagging that rat around and she slipped out of her hand and went splat on the table. And everybody in the room screamed. And they didn't notice that they woke up the box. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, I don't know if you know what the pants looked like in the 60s. And I go, I wasn't there, but I think everybody wore bell bottoms. He's like, yeah, everybody wore bell bottoms. Even the men in suits wore bell bottoms. He said, as soon as I saw that box moving, I knew it was time to tuck my pants into my socks. That box started to move and nobody noticed, and it fell off the table, hit the floor, and all these rats and mice went like flying out of it. And he said those bell bottoms were like super highways, rats running up the inside of their legs, up the drapes. And my mom was like, she says, I could not have planned that better. She said it was amazing. Anyway, chaos, as you can probably understand, ensued. But guess what? They moved the dump. So I suppose if you bring a little bit of the dump to them, they move the dump. Well, fast forward 30 years, how it ties into my life. I'm back from the Olympics, all right? I did not win a medal at the Olympics. I came 5th, okay? I'm fine with that now. I'm super happy with being an Olympian and very proud of my experience. But 3 months after, I was not super happy. I was still pretty raw. There's a thing called post-Olympics depression, and many athletes go through that had Olympic dreams of winning a medal. Well, I'm brought to this big conference in Ottawa. It was a big conference to talk about how can we win more medals and all this stuff. And I get called to the front of this big auditorium, and they're calling all these athletes to come forward, the MC. Well, there's all these famous Olympians who are medalists. They all know each other. They're all like, hey, how's it going? How's your medal? Give the special medalist handshake. And then my name gets called and they're all like, who are you? And I'm walking up going, I know why I'm here because I'm part of the mosaic of sport in Canada, right? The cultural mosaic. And being the only Indigenous person to go for, I self-identified Indigenous person to go for the Olympics from Canada and the United States. I was being brought up for that. So I'm kind of like looking at them. They don't know who I am. Well, MC suddenly says, we have a very special guest for you guys. And I'm like, oh, awesome. I'm like, you know, because sometimes like rock stars want to meet us, you know, like famous, you know, rock stars or people like that. And I was like, I wonder if Bono's in town. I'm like, is U2 playing? I'm like, maybe he's here. He wants to meet us. I'd be like so excited. Well, little trivia. It wasn't Bono, but if you guys, there's only one person who ever went from being the Minister of Indian Affairs to become Prime Minister. And this is important because this Prime Minister, Jean Chrétien, was also in the 1960s. He tried to do something. He tried to pass the White Paper. So the White Paper was this document that would have eradicated Indigenous rights within the Constitution, Section 35. So you can imagine the fight that ensued that Indigenous people had to do in the 60s. Everybody fought the White Paper. So I obviously knew, I didn't know him as Jean Chrétien. I knew him as Mr. White Paper. That's in my household, that's who he was, right? So when the MC of this conference says, we have a special guest, the, you know, Prime Minister of Canada. And I was like, in walks Jean Chrétien. I'm like, oh my God, it's Mr. White Paper. I was like, what do I do? Do I fight him? What do I do? I didn't know what to do. What do my mom want me to do? And I'm like, no, this is not the place. This is not the place to fight the guy. So he's going down this big long line of athletes. And he has an assistant and whispering in his ear saying, you know, so-and-so, this is so-and-so. And, you know, this is the medal they won and all this kind of stuff, shaking their hands. But when he gets to me, before he can say anything, this assistant, Jean Chrétien, says, how is your mother? And I'm like, and everybody stops like, wait, we don't even know who this girl is, but he knows her mother. And I'm like, she's good. She's good. She's, oh, your mother. She was a fighter. I said, oh, she still is. He's, oh, she kicked my butt. Oh, my goodness. And I said, she would still very much like to. And he laughs. Oh, ho, ho. If you know, remember Jean Chrétien is like, ho, 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 always laughing, you know, the Shawinigan handshake. Anyway, he says, you tell your mother I said hello. I said, I absolutely will. So I went home that night and I said, hey, Mom, you know, like, guess who says hi? And she's like, who? Jean Chrétien. She goes, he remembers me? I'm like, Mom, you let rats go in his freaking office building. You don't forget a woman who does that. He's like, oh, and I always use this joke, but if you got to be a certain age, it's like someone who boils your rabbit. Glenn Close, right? Fatal Attraction. Anyway, my mom wasn't a fatal attraction, but she was someone that you did not forget. Next screen, please. She was someone who was, you know, if she couldn't find one way to get there, she would find another way. And my mother has never, ever lost her sense of humor. She is one of the funniest people and always seeing the funny side to everything. I think that's what got her through so many hard times. This is a picture of my mom in London, England, and she's trying to get into Buckingham Palace just to deliver a letter to the Queen of England. And this guy's go, what are you talking about? And she says, well, I'm letting her know that we're claiming England in the name of the Mohawk Nation. And he goes, what are you talking about? She's like, well, your ancestors came over and did that to us and we were all there. So I'm just doing it back to you. So if you still ask my mom, she'll say that we own England. But that's my mom. Always a prolific letter writer, a prolific speaker on Indigenous issues in the 60s. I mean, my sister recently was researching her at the archives and she found letters that my mom wrote about forced sterilization of Indigenous women, that she believed that was happening in our communities. Well, we're hearing now that actually has happened and is still happening to Indigenous women in this country. So it's interesting that my mom was noticing that, and you know, she didn't start having children until she was in her 30s. Next slide, please. And it's interesting because I say that because back then that's considered like almost grandma territory. This is a picture of me. I'm the third of four daughters born to my mom. before the digital era. So if I look a little surprised, this is like one of 2 photos of me as a baby. And I think I'm surprised that I'm getting my photo taken. If you look, my oldest sister has like thousands of beautiful studio photos. But by the time I came along, I was like, oh yeah, whatever. So here I am being born. And I was actually a twin. My mom miscarried my twin, but I survived. I kept going. So I would have had a twin brother. Can you imagine the trouble, the ruckus we would have caused the world, me and my twin? But I had to do it all by myself with my sisters. Next slide, please. So, you know, when my mom started having kids, and this is a picture of us, our first Halloween in Ottawa. My mom, when she started having kids, she said, I am going to raise the next generation of disease-free, high-achieving warriors. And she had 4 daughters. But, you know, being that my mom understood, she understood what was out there in the world. She understood all the stuff that we were going to face as Indigenous women. And she knew she couldn't control a lot of it, but she could control what happened within the walls of our home. And she knew that she needed to provide us with a stable home. And she said, well, I moved, she moved us from Kahnawake to Ottawa. She got a job working for the government. And she moved us to a 2-bedroom apartment right across from the downtown YMCA, which is downtown Ottawa. And those 2 bedrooms she rented out to 2 older people, and we would sleep on the couch with her. And with that extra money, she bought us a full membership at the YMCA. And if you notice here, my 2 sisters are wearing 1976 overalls because she was always putting in our heads what was possible. So the 2 decisions my mom made was, 1, no drugs or alcohol were allowed in our house, not even cigarettes. And this is the 70s, people. Like, everybody smoked. Everybody smoked in the 70s. But my mom was so avidly against it. And no drugs and alcohol. And I remember asking her, you know, why was that, Mom? Not even anything. She says, I needed you to know that when you shut your eyes at night and put your head down, that you were safe, nothing was going to happen, and that you could dream. And that was so powerful, the safety to dream, not just the power to dream, but the safety to be able to drop your guard and just let your spirit wander to think of the greatest possibilities that you could achieve. And that's what she wanted to give us. She wanted to give us that safety. And another decision she made was she put us into sports. And she chose sports for us that were not judged sports. She chose running and she chose swimming because she didn't want she always said, I didn't want your nativeness to get in the way. And we are also on the front end of kids being renamed Indigenous names. So we all had these weird names. Can you imagine? So we were these young Indigenous kids living in the city with Indigenous names, and a very powerful mom. And my mom was, she put us in, we were predominantly swimmers. And, you know, she always wanted us to know we weren't alone. You know, she became president of the swim club. She was always chief official at the swim meets. She was always there, always present, and always made it known that she was there for us. And that made a huge difference. And so when I talk about young kids and having the ability to dream, there has to be someone there at that age that's there to help you, stand with you. They can't do it for you. She couldn't get in the pool and swim for us, but she could stand there and be that security that we needed at the time, and make sure that we were safe and respected. Next slide. My mom was also, she was always, she was very physically fit and very active. Not a high performance athlete or anything like that. She did yoga. She would take us to, you know, running races in and around the city, 2K, 5K races. I remember she would always run in the masters category. She was always like, I always got a medal, because she was like one of 3 women at the time running. But she knew that of all the role models that she could show us, she was the most powerful of them all. She was the one we saw every single day, and that we were going to emulate her the most. And so showing us how to be physically fit, showing us to eat properly, respect our bodies, I couldn't have asked for a better role model for me, because even in her 80s, she's still riding her bike and walking on her treadmill and doing what she's always really valued, that gift from creation, her body, her mind, and her spirit. Next slide, please. My mom was always, there were three things, just keep pressing to all three words there. When I look back and ask her, what did you want me to learn through sports? She said, I wanted you to learn three things. So my mom never told me and my sisters, you have to do this and you have to do that and you're going to become this. Never said that. She only said, I don't care what you do, you have to achieve, you have to push yourself, you have to work yourself to achieve your greatest potential. No half-ass. She'd never accept anything. She never accepted that. She says, because you don't come from a people that did things half-assed. You come from a people that went through a form of natural selection, war, famine, disease, very hard, and genocide, and all the things, residential schools, all the stuff that our people have been through. She said, if you were lazy and didn't feel like going to set your traps properly the first time, or go collect wood when it was freezing outside, your family would starve, they would freeze. You come from a people that did things perfectly the first time. They were perfectionists, they were high achievers, and that's how they survived. They survived because they were able to do that. So you honor that by whatever you choose to do it like that. And she wanted us to learn perseverance. And it was hard to teach in my day. It is even harder now to teach as we live in an instant gratification culture of texting and, TikTok and, all this stuff, like where kids are seeing this instant fame that happens overnight. Well, it took me 17 years to get to the Olympics. That's a long time. I only knew I was going for the last year, and I had to train for 16 of those like I was going to go win the gold medal. Perseverance is that thing that sport can teach you, that getting out of the bed when it's minus 20 outside in a snowstorm and getting in your car and jumping in a pool, which is counterintuitive, let me tell you. The pools are not warm. They're freezing, and then training for 6 hours. Perseverance has been one of the most valuable things that I've gotten from sports. She also wanted us to learn respect. Respect is like, how can I say it? It's like she loves being Mohawk. Being a Mohawk woman is like the best thing ever. She's like, it's the best. We are matrilineal people, all, very powerful within our world. She said, but if I ever hear you making fun of another people, another race, and calling it pride, I'm going to kick your butt. That's not pride, that's racism. She says, you have to remember that before you are Mohawk, you're a human being. And you're going to go out into the world and you're going to have to train with people, work with people, live with people. And you're going to have to connect with them on a human level, spirit to spirit. She says, but if you always hold yourself separate, I'm Native, you're not going to achieve your dreams. You can't just achieve that in our little world. So that respect would prove to be something very powerful and very important for me later on in life. And then she wanted us to learn achievement, fighting to be the best we could be. And sport was an incredible place to learn that. Next slide. She also wanted to show us what was possible. And I don't know, there it is. Just, you can click it again. There's another line. I remember watching Alwyn Morris. He's from my community. I think I was about 8 years old, and watching him on this little black and white television win gold in Los Angeles. And I'd never heard of the Olympics. We didn't have, like, you guys remember Encyclopedia Britannicas? I grew up on an Encyclopedia Britannica world. Google didn't exist. So if you were going to learn about something, someone had to tell you about it, show you what it was. And I remember watching him in the 10,000 meters and looked at my mom and like, what is he doing? She's like, he is trying to be the best in the world. The Olympics is where all the best athletes go. And if he wins this race, he's Olympic champion. He's the best in the world. And it was like, my mind was blown. I was like, what? This is a possibility? Oh my gosh, And when he won gold and got up on the top of that podium and bent down to get his medal, he stood up and that eagle feather was in his hand. And I literally thought in my little 8-year-old mind, I'm like, he knows I'm watching him. My God, he did that for me. Like I thought that he knew because it felt so much like he was doing that to show me what was possible. And from that moment of watching him, the Olympics became my goal. It became my journey. It became my destination. Next. And I'm not sure we're gonna, you can actually click, because this is not gonna work. Click again. Again. Yeah. Just, I was gonna show you, and I hope for all of you avid fans, click one more time. We'll watch that. It is the voted one of the top 10 finishes in Olympic history. It is the final lap of Billy Mills's 10,000 meter run in the 1964 Olympics. That same year that Alwyn Morris won gold, a movie came out called Running Brave about Billy Mills. And so Billy Mills is a Lakota Sioux from Pine Ridge, South Dakota. It's a community that's nestled right in the heart of South Dakota in the Badlands. And it is actually one of the poorest counties in the United States. And Billy, he went on to run. He's a phenomenal runner. Went to run for Kansas State University, NCAA, qualified for the Olympic team, qualified for the final of the men's 10,000 meters, and never had won an international race in his life. And you'll see in that final lap, at about the last 200 meters, he's in third position. And he's in third position. Nobody's around him. He could cruise and win bronze. Comes down to that final 100 meters. He decides to get in the scrum. And I was a track runner as well. And for those of you guys who run track, the one thing I knew is you don't get into the scrum. You try to stay away from people because you can be hit, you can be tripped, you can be disqualified, all this kind of stuff. Well, in that final 100 meters, he does get hit. He goes wide and then runs and sprints right by the Olympic champion and the world record holder. And he held that title and still is the only person from all the Americas ever to win the 10,000 meters at the Olympics. And I remember getting a chance to talk to Billy. And I said to him, I asked him that question. I'm like, why would you risk it? Why would you go anywhere near anybody? And he said, well, first and foremost, you know this, you don't train every single day to come third. He said, sometimes when we are going after things in our life, we have a dream, we will put 98% of ourselves on the table. We'll give 98%, but we hold a little back. He says, do you know why we hold that back? And I go, why? In case we fall, in case we trip. It's to be able to pick ourselves up again. And he said, I wasn't willing to wonder for the rest of my life if I could be Olympic champion by holding back that little bit. He said, so I put that last 2% on the table. He said, yes, I could have tripped and fell, or I could become Olympic champion. He says, but I needed to know. And he said, and you know what the greatest thing about being a Native American is? And I go, what? He says, we come from a people that if we trip and fall, they will pick us up, they will dust us off, and they will keep pushing us forward. So what did I have to be afraid of? I know that would prove to be one of the most valuable lessons that I have ever heard. And I would carry with me throughout my career. Next screen. But also, one of the things that this presentation is about trauma and is about the things that stop people in their tracks. And for me, there's so much talent in our communities. And I remember being brought up, those people being pointed out to me. Oh, that person's a great athlete, but that one could have been in the NHL. But I remember thinking to myself, well, what happened? What happened to them that they didn't go? Well, I soon found that out when I was 15 or 14 years old, when the Oka Crisis broke out in my community. And I wound up back home in Ganawage. And then I followed my mother all the way to Ganasdage or the Oka, where she was acting as a negotiator. And I saw some very, very incredible things that summer. I saw terrifying things. I saw race riots. I saw every single night watching these people riot, not and trying to get to me and trying to hurt me and burning us in effigy. And I remember thinking to myself, like, they don't even know me. Like, I experienced racism as a kid. I did. And I always thought it was like, I could always do something about it. I could either beat them on the field or beat them with my fist. I got a lot of fights growing up. But I'd never seen it to this extent. Someone hated me, not because of me personally, but what I was as a Mohawk. And that was terrifying. I also saw amazing things. I saw Indigenous women as leaders. You'll see that in some of the footage from the Oka Crisis of how our women regaining their rightful role of our during these times of warfare, of directing our warriors and calling them back. That is our right as Indigenous women to do that. And I also saw Indigenous people rising across the country. You know, I meet so many people today that talk about the Oka Crisis being really, really fundamental change in their life, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, because a lot of non-Indigenous people will say, I remember where I was. They always remember where they were when that was happening and what they were doing and how that changed the way they saw the world. Because you got to remember, you know, this happened before social media. Indigenous issues didn't make the front pages of any newspapers or headline any newscasts. And you couldn't share stuff on social media. It just didn't exist at the time. So you got to remember, for 78 days during the Oka Crisis, Indigenous issues were the headlining thing on our national newscasts in Canada and around the world. And it was a shaking of this country to its core, because we were called terrorists. The army was brought in, and there was 8,000 troops sent to both of our communities to contain us. And it was a terrifying, but a very impactful experience for me. And at the very end of this, and the next screen, on September 26th, we decided, can you switch to the next screen? Or is it frozen? Am I frozen? Oh, okay. We decided on September 26th that it was time to end. We had negotiated kind of an ending to the standoff. If you can see here, we were supposed to march out of the front gates of the treatment center and get onto 2 buses and be taken to a military prison and processed. You can see in the front of this kind of group of people, there's myself holding my little sister. But what happened to change that is, like, we were supposed to march out the front gates, but they pushed right before we were supposed to leave. And you can see it's dark outside, so it's kind of dark. They didn't want us to get mistaken as warriors and hurt, so they put us right in front to show that we were children. But right before we were supposed to leave, they pushed the media barricade back about 300 meters, so they couldn't see what was happening. So rather than going out the front gates, we made a right-hand turn, and right at there was barbed wire surrounding us, and there was an area that was only 2 levels of barbed wire, and someone put a spinal board on top of that barbed wire, and people started to run out onto the highway, and fights started to break out, and just absolute chaos. And I was holding my little sister's hand. She was 4 at the time, and she started to make this sound. And, like, I always think about this. You know, I'm a mom now, so I have heard almost every cry imaginable, and I know them all. I know I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm hurt, I'm sad, I'm frustrated. I know the sound, they're slightly different. And for you parents, you know what I'm talking about. Well, there's a very special sound that a child makes that I hope you never, ever hear. And that was a sound that was coming out of her mouth. It was a sound like this absolute terror. I'm going to die. Like, that's all I could think of. And she was looking at this soldier that was standing in our way, a young non-Indigenous man, young, really young, holding a gun, just standing there looking at us. And he looked absolutely, like, he looked terrified himself, but he had this big gun, and she's looking at him, looking at his gun. And I said, he's not going to hurt us. And I put my hand on his chest, and I pushed him backwards. And he took a step back and he let us walk right out in front onto the highway. Next screen, please. And when I got to the highway, I remember I got intercepted by an MP and I was trying to push my way to the media barricade. And when I got to the media barricade, I recognized a soldier there that 2 weeks earlier didn't allow my grade 10 school books in. I remember arguing with him, and I pointed my finger at him, and I pulled my little sister behind him, like, I know you. And I pulled her behind me. And right at that moment, I got hit in the chest. Like the wind, you know, that feeling of like when you get the wind knocked out of you. And I'm like, and I bent forward, and then someone pushed me backwards, and I fell back onto my back on the ground, and my little sister landed on top of me. And right at that moment, a photograph was taken. Next screen. And I never understood why I never remembered this as a continuous memory. I only remembered it as these snapshots, like photos being taken, but not as a continuous memory. Please don't open the door. No, please. You cannot come in here, please. Please. You want to say hi? Come say hi. I'm speaking to a whole bunch of people. They can't see you, but look, this is my son, Sonakaragete. I'm about half an hour more, please. Okay? I really appreciate it. No, you gotta go. 2 seconds. You can't. You can't come back here. You can't. No, I can't.
Waneek, you're muted now. Let's see if we can unmute you. 1 sec. No, we still can't hear you. Nope.
I'm on.
Oh, you were unmuted and then I muted you. Sorry, everyone. Yeah, now you're unmuted.
Oh, Sunday night, my son does not want to let me do this, but I wanted to finish the story. So, and he has impeccable timing, right? Anyway, he's the joy. He's the joy that has helped me deal with this.
It's leading to the build-up, the anticipation for everyone watching. That's all it was.
I know, but you know, it's funny when we talk about trauma, and we're learning a lot about PTSD right now, much more than we did 30 years ago. We didn't have any understanding about it. And what I understand and came to understand through many, many years of therapy was I didn't remember that in a consistent memory because my mind was either making a decision of either shutting down to protect itself or having a mental break. And I think it chose to shut it down. And it was after this picture was taken, I was dragged by the back of my jacket all the way back to where my mother was. I gave my little sister to my mom, and I looked down and I had blood all down the front of my shirt. And I didn't realize that the order had been given to put bayonets on the ends of their weapons. And I had been stabbed in the chest. And I got told 22 hours later that had it been a centimeter either way, it would have gone right into my heart. And so, you know, I remember thinking to myself, I was so upset, so sad, so angry, so many things that you could see in my face in this picture. And after I got released from the military prison, I kind of locked myself in my room for like 6 days. I didn't leave, and I was too afraid. And my mom came in my room and she sat down on my bed and she said, "So what do you want to do?" And I said, "I don't know. I just want to stay here. I don't want to leave. I'm safe here." And she says, "Well, yeah." She says, "But you had this dream of going to the Olympics." And I had been showing signs. Like I was provincial swimming champion. I was had city records in running. I was moving up in water polo, being noticed. And she said, "If you stop now, you're handing that dream over to that soldier who stabbed you, and you'll be his victim for the rest of your life." And she said, "Well, I will support whatever you want to do." And she got up and she was leaving my room and she turned around and then she pointed at me. She said, but you remember, I didn't raise you to be anybody's victim. And then she left the room. And I'm thinking, now looking back, I'm like, probably not the textbook way you deal with someone with PTSD, but it's what I needed to hear. I just couldn't live my life not knowing. And, you know, so I went back to water polo. I walked back on the pool deck, whole non-native team and non-native coach. If I hadn't learned those very valuable lessons of when I was young about finding the human connection with people, I probably wouldn't have been able to see beyond the violence and racism I had seen that summer. These girls loved me. They helped me come back to something that was like medicine for me and has been to this day. Physical activity, sports was my medicine. And I'm not telling you, like, from this picture, you know, it was 10 years almost to the day that I was at the Olympics. And I can tell you those 10 years, I faced so much, you know, going into a sports system where they didn't give a damn about who I was, what I was, where I was from. They would just perform. You know, you're here to perform. And that was really hard. It was a very hierarchical system. And I wasn't used to that. I was used to having my voice heard. That's the Haudenosaunee way, is your voice is heard. And I struggled with that indifference and that racism and that systemic racism that we talk about now. I felt there was no space for me. There was no space for me or my culture within that world. So many times I wanted to quit, and I would come home and I'm like, that's it. I've had it. And then I would think about my little sister and that little girl I'm holding there. And she was like, she watched everything I did. She was like my little shadow. And I remember her, you know, thinking to myself, one of the promises I made after the Oka Crisis was, I wanted her to be successful. I wanted her to achieve her greatest potential. And I knew that if I didn't show her, if I quit, I was showing her how to quit. If I didn't find some reason to keep going, the courage, you know, the bravery, you know, to kind of keep at it, I wouldn't have done it. So I would decide, you know, almost one day at a time sometimes to keep going. And it was for her. And that was really, really important for me, to have her there and to show her that, you know, no matter what, I was going to be successful. Next screen, please. So I know we're kind of running over with my crazy interruptions and stuff like that. And I really, really want to hear and talk to you guys about, you know, have questions, but I really would like to introduce my family, because that sums up sort of what we're talking about, like how my mother, like how did my mother combat that world of racism that she grew up in? Well, my mother made two really important decisions. And I often say this, I said, you know, you don't have to change the world, but sometimes you can change the world of your children. You can change the world of these people, and then they can go and change the world of other people and change the world and change the world. And that's what my mother did. By those two decisions that she had control over, she created an opportunity to have 4 daughters that went on to achieve their greatest potential. Now, on the left of the screen is my sister, Dr. Gisto Horn, the first Mohawk woman doctor from my community, mother of 6 children. And she's now working frontline as the only physician in Aguzasne, which is where her father comes from, and fighting the COVID outbreak. Sorry. She's so incredibly brave and powerful. Like, so many of our people are all those frontline workers. And it just hit me, you know, like I call her twice a day just to see how she's doing, but she's so amazing. And then my other sister on the other side is Dr. Gohan Horn-Miller. She's the Deputy Provost of Indigenous Affairs at Carleton, single mom of 4 daughters and a grandmother of 1. And there's that little sister who's the tallest of us all. She's like 5 foot, I think 5'10". Just became a mom herself 2 months ago. And you might know her because she's an actor, and she's in a show called Letterkenny. She plays the head of the Native gang in Letterkenny. And she was just in a really amazing mini series called Barkskins, which was produced by National Geographic. And you got to check that out. So she's an award-winning actor and producer, and she did a podcast with my mom called Coffee with My Mom. And if you want to know more stories about my mom, it is so funny. It is hilarious, yet very incredibly insightful into history. So this is my family. What can I say about that experience? I think that, I'm 45 now, and we've had this incredible year. Next slide. And I'll end it. This year, it has tested us. It's tested everybody. And, people often ask me, how do you learn to be resilient? Well, I always tell people resilience is like a muscle. My mom prepared us for the world we were entering. She told us it was going to be hard. I knew. So I wasn't surprised when I would face these things. But my mom always made me understand that we were going to find a way around it. We weren't going to let it stop us. And, every battle I fought, it's just like any athlete knows, every game you have makes you a better athlete, makes you a better, smarter, tougher, more experienced. Well, resilience is just like that. Every battle you go through, everything you encounter, I had a conversation with my oldest daughter recently about fear. I'm like, that first fear that you conquer as a kid is there a monster under my bed? And you're terrified of the thought of this monster, but you have to overcome your fear in order to take a look. There's a monster under her bed. There's no monster there, right? Well, that's your first test of your resilience. And then you get better at it. And I told her, I said, nothing that you dream to do is not going to scare the crap out of you. It is going to scare you. But all these little things you overcome growing up teach you to be less fearful, tougher, smarter. Oh, I'm not scared. I got this. And by the time the big ones come, you've got it. And those muscles have memory, and they store and they learn, they become more efficient and more powerful. That's what resiliency is. Resiliency isn't a destination. It is something that you have to work at, you have to upkeep, and you have to keep going on and share it. Next screen. Please. Just keep pressing. And, we're at a time now where we're facing, not just as Indigenous people, but as people, as human beings, we're in an incredibly terrifying time, but whether you're Indigenous or not, you're here because someone in your past, and I talk a lot about this about our people, someone in our past found a way to be resilient and survive. And that knowledge has been passed on through generation to generation. And I think about it, I joked at the beginning of this presentation, I don't feel old enough. I don't feel old enough to be a mom. I feel like a 16-year-old, but it is my time. It's my time. It's our time to basically give to that resilience and because our kids are they're going to be handed down that bundle, that understanding of how to be strong and tough from us. And they're going to have to learn from it, use it, and also contribute their own ways of being brave and having courage. And so, I think through all of this, it's been really, it's been one of those processes where, we have to all learn to be brave and be brave together. And it's been really hard, but we're going to make it through. And I strongly believe that. And so many experiences in my life have made me understand that that's possible. And I'm sorry, I know we're at the end of our presentation, but we have 5 minutes. Do you have any questions? Thank you so much. And I talked too much, but I apologize.
No, Waneek, don't worry about that. And even though it says 5 minutes, we don't actually cut off at 5 minutes. So
okay.
Keep going. We have to go, and I know that a lot of people are really interested in what you're saying, and we don't have any questions up right now, but I'm wondering if maybe you could talk, because I did put up in the question chat the 2 paragraphs that you gave us. about systemic racism in sport. But maybe you could talk a little bit about the research that you are doing. So Waneek is going to soon be published. Some of her research is going to be published, and it's really exciting, and it talks about culture in sport. So would you be able to speak to that a little bit for the coaches and the athletes who are listening?
Absolutely. So this has been something that really like anybody in academics that comes from sport, it's really interesting to get a chance to really delve into experiences and be put in a position where I can start looking at it analytically and be able to contribute to the, what do they call it, the academic body of work. There really wasn't much, there's really not a lot about Indigenous motivation. And so I feel that where I'm at right now is I'm building, I'm helping build that, which is really cool. Oh, there's my kids. you can just put me up on there or get rid of that. I don't know. So I wrote a paper. One of the first papers I wrote was called Cultural Space, Indigenous Cultural Space in Sport. And so if you think about it, so a lot of the writings and a lot of things that I was looking at what is sport used for? So you look at what sport is used for in society, and what are the acceptable behaviors, culture, it's being challenged quite a bit lately, hazing, all that. But in the past, it's been used to pass these values down from generation to generation, like hyper-masculinization, domination over another, winning at all costs. Like that type of behavior is something that you see, very predominantly in high-level sports. And so I started looking at, like, why is it I always felt kind of really alien in a lot of ways in sport? I loved it. I loved winning. I loved fighting. I loved being part of a team, all that. But what was it that didn't sit well with me? And it was because the research that I looked at was about how Indigenous people use sport in our culture. And it was often, especially like sports like lacrosse, which is traditional to my people, it was used to settle disputes. And somebody who was a good athlete was not held above somebody else in our culture who was maybe not a great athlete, but are really good at some other cultural thing or artistic thing or something like that. So the value, so we saw a person not just for one specific value or skill they had. You were valued for, like, as an entire person. And I found that in sort of mainstream sport, this value of just that athletic ability, and also those cultural values that are being handed down. Now, why is it? And I was looking at this kind of idea from a perspective of why is it that Indigenous people have such a hard time in mainstream sports? Like, what's happening, right? Well, it's because the cultures and norms of that sporting world are very different from what a lot of times we're used to. So like I talked about how I went into the sporting world and I was a rookie and my word didn't matter. It was like, you don't matter until you become a veteran, right? And that was like that very hierarchical world. And that was very different than how I was raised and to understand that you had a voice. So like these were things. So I talked about the value, like if we want Indigenous people to succeed, I needed to learn, how can I bring my culture into mainstream, into my team and strengthen my team? What was it and how could I make space for that? And it was really important, not only for my own well-being, but also I need to feel at home in this house of sport that I was creating. I needed to see my art on the walls. I needed to see my, and I needed to fight for that. And so when I talk about cultural space in sport, it's about the understanding that the understanding of sport culture needs to expand to make room for Indigenous values. And you'll see that in some parts of the world, like New Zealand, where the haka is taught traditionally to every national team, not just the rugby, which is most well known for the All Blacks, but the water polo players did it and everybody else did it. So like you'll see it. They also, there's a really great paper written by a former Olympic field hockey player. She's Maori. She became an academic, and she wrote a paper on how the indigenization of the New Zealand Olympic movement and what they did after the 2004 Olympics and how they indigenized it. It was really, really cool because it was taking these very powerful symbols from a Maori culture and unifying, the nation. And I think that, our sport, like the power of sport in this country, is it does have the power to unify us. It is a tool of reconciliation. But the values that we teach within it need to be the values of reconciliation, not the values of dominance, not the values of like old school, I'm going to beat you down and you're going to be forever a loser type thing. So that's what I wrote about. I'm also continuing work on Indigenous languages in self-talk, athlete self-talk, which is, we all know we do. Not just athletes, everybody self-talks, but I talked about the importance of Indigenous languages to understand how we see the world and understand the world. So I want to look at the words for courage and look at the words for never give up in different Indigenous languages, and then having that as it applies to sport self-talk and understanding that. So that's some of the two of the things I'm looking at right now.
Sounds amazing. And I know once your paper's published, I'll share it with all of the coaches at Acadia, because I think quite a few of them would be interested in it. We've got a few comments and questions coming in, a lot of comments about how amazing your mother sounds. One person also said, I wish I could let my young cousin hear you speak. She endured an attack as a young Indigenous hockey player. She went back inside the ring and the other team grabbed her and cut her hair. It was dealt with, but not sure of all the details of the outcome, but no one was charged. You would be an inspiration for her. So you and I both know, for people who don't understand, our hair means everything to us, especially when you grow it long. And you'll sometimes see in Waneek, she can speak to it more as well, but you'll especially see males, but in females as well, but you'll see when we cut our hair, it normally means some type of trauma has happened to us. It's significant to us. We've lost someone or something has happened. So if someone else does that to us, it's very, very, like, not only is that act in itself wrong, but for us as Indigenous people, someone to actually cut our hair is very traumatizing. And it also, another layer of trauma takes to residential schools where they did cut our hair off too. But yeah,
I can't imagine. It's one of the things that I've been really, I'm outspoken about the power and value of sport, but I'm also feel that it's far too common and to hear these stories of racism in sport and how there's no accountability. And so, we still see sport in Canada as this like extracurricular thing that happens kind of on the side, but they don't realize it could play, and it should play a valuable role in building the character and the ability to work together of all peoples in this country. But the problem is that sport is still inaccessible to so many people. You need to have money, you need to have the ability to get there, you need to all those types of things. So, we're still floundering. And I talk about reconciliation, like I love the calls to action, but like what are the tools? I worked on the National Inquiry into MMIWG, and I was the director of community engagement. And I remember being like, well, what are the tools? Okay, you can call it the problems, but what are the tools we're doing something about it? And I'm so much of a solution-based thinker. I want solutions. I want us to have an act. I also want solutions that people can get behind and that aren't so complicated that we don't understand them. And sport is one of those worlds where it can be such a powerful force for good or a very powerful force for bad, right? So as you see, that young girl, hopefully will rise like a phoenix and not stay in hate, but go back to love for herself and love for the sport, and not let that beat her down, because that's something that I've heard far too often in this country. That's kind of stuff happening.
We have another question. We know that you were embraced by your teammates, but what about fans? What types of racism did you experience as an athlete?
You know, it's funny. I can't see. I'm a really loud and proud and people person. I have the ability to self-advocate. Fans were fascinated with me. Media was fascinated until they weren't. Until, I would get people saying, well, during the Oka Crisis, you said you weren't proud to be Canadian. So why are you on the Olympic team? Like, this is something I said at 14 years old, right after I got stabbed. Would you be happy to be Canadian if you got stabbed by a Canadian soldier and that person was never held accountable? No, you wouldn't. So I remember being attacked like that within the media, attacked like that by different people. Things like, being said to me, hey, chief, hey, this, hey, that. But I became very, it's weird. I didn't have a lot of angry fans at me, because the sad thing about water polo is we don't have a lot of fans. And the fans that are up there, we know them. They're our family members. So we would be playing to our family members. But I did face a lot of stereotypical attitude towards Indigenous women. Sort of that we're these exotic, hypersexual beings, things like that type of stuff. And that was really hard to deal with, because it was just the stereotypes that were, I was always battling, the fact that one day I was just gonna, just gonna fall off the wagon and become this big alcoholic. Like, that kind of stuff that I had to, the comments and the jabs and the jokes, even by teammates that didn't really, like my teammate calling me chief or that type of stuff, like really kind of like having to educate. But I do often say it's super important to teach our young people to be self-advocates, right? Speak up for ourselves, because in those situations, no one was going to do it for me. My mom wasn't there. I had to learn, and I had to learn to do it in a way where people would hear me. And it like, the difference between someone hearing you and talking at somebody. There's two very different ways. And I knew that I was in this arena that wasn't super understanding of me. So I had to figure out a way to educate these people through love, through some way, shape, or form. And so I did it with my culture. I did it with my community. I did it with feasting in my community. I did it with all that. I threw the entire gamut at this team to get them to understand who I was. And it worked. It did. And
sorry, go ahead. I didn't want to cut you off, but
go ahead.
Builds on it. It says, what did you do in the sports spaces to bring your culture into that space? Do you have specific examples that you can give? And I know, even thinking of the Pan American Games, some of the things that you did there, that you definitely have a lot of examples where you brought culture into sport.
Well, I remember when I was a deputy chef de mission in 2015 for the Canadian team in Toronto. And so one thing I did was, so our job is the chef de missions, we're the team captains, basically, right? We welcome all the teams that come in, like Canadian teams, and they have an orientation, and then we welcome them. So my family made 800 tobacco pouches, 800 for every member of the team and staff that came with them. And I remember when I would be there to welcome these teams in, all the different teams coming to the village. And I would, because Toronto is traditional Haudenosaunee territory. The Mississaugas always say it's not, but we say it is. Anyway, it's up for interpretation. Anyway, I would say, welcome to our territory. You're here, and I would say, I give them the speech of, I'm offering you this tobacco as you come into our territory, and I'm asking you to come here. I'm not to win. I'm not asking you to win, because that's not something I can ask you to do. But what I can ask you to do is what our ancestors used to ask our warriors to do when they would go to war. They would tell them, you need to fight from the very moment you step on that field. That first second, don't look to the half, don't look to the end of the game. that first second, live in the moment. There's a power in that moment. That power is something you have to focus on. And that moment leads to the next moment, to the next moment. And I said, I'm offering this tobacco to give you, to tell you. And you got to remember that your great grandchildren are going to be told stories about you. And I would say, what are the stories that you want to be told about you to your great grandchildren when they don't want to go to practice or they don't want to do this? Their mother or father is going to say, you had a great grandfather that was at the Pan Am Games and they fought for the gold medal or they did this. What is the legacy? What is your legend? And I said, and you right at this moment are starting to write your legend. Make it the best legend you could ever have. And I'm telling you, these athletes started to cry because they had never been spoken to like that, about this living in the moment and being as powerful and all this other Indigenous concepts that are important to our people. Another thing that I did at the Pan Am Games was right before the opening ceremonies that was at the big Rogers Center. It is tradition for the chef de mission to do a big speech. And so I told the chef de mission, I said, hey, I'm gonna do a special speech. And he says, okay, because there was me, Elise Mercotte, who's the French, I was the English, and then he was, oh my God, my brain is frying right now, and I'm thinking of the cyclist that was the chef de mission. Anyway, he says, no problem, Waneek, no problem. And he was so supportive of me. So we stood up, all these athletes, like 800 athletes, all dressed in Canada uniforms. And I stood up on this table, and we had this big ghetto blaster with a mic. And I said, at this speech, I said my whole traditional name, Waneek Karapinuta, and I said the date and where we were. And I said, in my culture, it is our tradition that the women have the right to declare war. We have the right to muster our warriors to declare war. We also have the right to call them back. So I said, on this date, time, every place, I said, I am declaring war on Pan America, and I'm sending all of you out. And I said, I'm not telling you to win. I'm not telling you, I said, I'm telling you to make sure that all of your opposition, whether it's on the field, in the pool, on the mat, on the track, that they regret the day they even started competing in their sport. I want them to fear you, respect you. I want them to be telling your legend in their home nations for the rest of their lives. And you should have seen the look on the faces of the athletes. They were like, what? Like, it was so funny because, especially the women, they were like, what? They thought it was awesome. But it was an understanding of how our culture, injecting that in, empowering the whole. And it's something that's been one of my greatest pleasures because it's a glimpse into the power of our people. And that Canadian society doesn't get to see that very often. They see our brokenness. They see our dysfunction. Very rarely do they get to see our power in that way that's shared. And I was really happy to get a chance to do that.
We have 2, maybe 3 questions left. One is from one of our coaches. He coaches the women's basketball team at Acadia, Len Harvey. He asks, what are the missing elements that would contribute to success for Indigenous student athletes that you would want sport leaders to consider?
What I would want, and I think this is something that can be asked of any athlete. So it's not just the understanding of Indigenous, but what makes them powerful? Who gives them strength? Why do they compete? And often for Indigenous people, the why is often family, community, to show the world what we're made of. I think that being part of that collective is really important to us. We're a clan people, right? So being able to create that within a team environment, like a collective power, that it's the cyclical thing, that you're part of that circle of power rather than a pyramid of power where the coach is at the top and then the veterans, that we all need each other. that everybody has a role to play, that they're here and they're very, very important, working at making everybody feel that, and asking them how they feel they empower that team, and what is it they feel they can contribute. And, it was important for me to understand that, because there is sort of a sort of unsaid way in which athletes, when they get into a team sport, there's that strong team culture already there. And if you don't fit, you kind of try to conform. There's a need and a push to conform to that. And I realized that when I was an athlete, I was trying to conform, but I was like putting out my own flame. And I needed to figure out, how was I going to have my flame within the context of the team? And I needed my teammates. It was important. And so I had to figure that out. And it was hard because there's no book. But if I could say anything, I would say, asking them what it is they inspires them, sharing that with their team, making it important as part of that team culture. And I know that there's always going to be starters and there's going to be people that play more, and I get that. But that doesn't mean that your bench players are less important. So how do you make everybody feel as important part of that team power? And that's something that is distinct to every team. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I don't know if it answers the question for Len, but to me it answers the question. And I do have to say that and give recognition to Acadia University, because they're doing a lot to try to include Indigenous athletes. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean on their teams right now, but in terms of providing support to our Mi'kmaq athletes in Nova Scotia. So trying to give conditioning to all of our Mi'kmaq athletes. It was going to be Team Nova Scotia for NAG, but that's a little ways off. They're just going to continue the conditioning for them, so it gets to that piece about that we have so much talent in our communities, but the opportunity not to really build or get the support that they need. So Acadia is trying to give that to them, also trying to provide outreach for nutrition as well, learning about proper nutrition, because we know that's a challenge coming out of residential schools, especially, and into our communities, and also building on a mentorship program. So having, it's in the talks, but to be built on, to have our coaches and student athletes mentor our Mi'kmaq athletes. So these are some of the examples that Acadia is already working on, and then you've been a part of our basketball camp that we have, and we want to build on that too, just to encourage our youth to see that dreaming is possible, and like you said, to feel safe to dream, because I think that's a big thing, that if you're non-Indigenous or not from a minority that has certain challenges in life, and when I say challenges, I mean struggles and fear at times of racism. Dreaming, feeling safe to dream isn't a reality at times for individuals. So I think that's a really important message for individuals participating in this event today to understand, is like, dreaming isn't always something that everyone can do or believes is possible. So I think that's a key message that can be brought out of this session this evening. One question asked by an individual is, you said that you need to train your brain to be strong, like muscle memory. Are there certain things you did early to recover from your trauma and go back to everyday life, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I think one of the things is, I come from I don't know if you know much about Mohawks, but we're not too different from Mi'kmaq. We are stubborn, very proud people. And the thought of being under somebody's control was really, I bucked at that, right? So, one of the things that really my mom teaching me, first and foremost, that I did have control on how, at a young age, I had, like, it was really hard for her because she raised us. Yes, I was like a little fearful of her. She had to lay down the law, but she also made me understand that I had control over my life and my choices and how I responded to situations, right? So, trauma, like the Oka Crisis and stuff like that, it was like, I went through it. It was hard, but it wasn't going to own me. That locus of control was inside me. I had control of that. That's all I own, is that control. I don't want anything I can't take anything else to, with me when I'm gone. And my mom would constantly say that you have control. You decide how that affects you or doesn't affect you. Nobody else does. And, teaching me at a young age that things were going to be hard. There were going to be obstacles, but I'll be there to help you. Don't worry. And you know what? She was there. She was there every single time I needed her. And that was really, really important, is to have someone's back, to be there. I remember, I had trouble with the national team. I got kicked off from, that's a whole other presentation, but I got kicked off the national team for getting the coaches fired for abuse. So I was way before the safe sports space thing, like 15 years before. And we got them fired because we had an investigation done on them. And well, that didn't last very long, right? Like my career ended because our sport world is so small, and I ended up getting kicked off. But then I took that to court. I took Water Polo Canada to court. And my one teammate, who's still one of my best friends in the whole world, she's Quebecois, French, best friend in the world, sat on my side. She understood why I fought. She understood why I got them fired, because that was a culturally appropriate reaction, that you do not stand by and let teammate or someone else get abused. That's like your cousin. Like, I saw my teammates as my sisters, as my family. I fought in the water. I had bench clearing balls. I can't tell you how many noses I broke to protect my teammates. Like, I would bring all of my warriorness into how I played. So why would I let coaches mistreat anybody? Why would I? And I understood that as an important value of who I was, and it ended up ending my career early. I didn't get to go on to the many Olympics that I was hoping to, but it's still, to this day, I would do it again. I wouldn't stand by and let someone mistreat anybody. And there was my mom on one side and my teammate on the other side. And my teammate understood, because she had hung out with me and actually lived with me in Ganawage when we were training. And she says, I get her. I understand why she did it. And it's very culturally relevant. So, I think about, like, overcoming those things and teaching at a young age the really strong values of that. You have the right to protect yourself, and you have the right to dictate how you want to be treated, and you should stand up for other people, because that's your family. And so I've done that even when it didn't get me anywhere. It got me booted, but that's life. And I can withstand. That almost toppled me, because it took away the one thing I loved, which was my sport. I loved it so much, but I overcame it. And it's something that has now, it was interesting when I got inducted into the Hall of Fame. I couldn't believe I was getting inducted with like Martin Brodeur. Oh my God, I can't remember the names of everybody, but like Olympic gold medalists and all these people. And I didn't win a medal. And I stood there and I said, I know why I'm here. I'm here because I endured this system. And I came out the other end and I wasn't beaten. And that's why I'm here. But I'm proud to be here, because it now gives me an opportunity to continue to fight to make this world better, so that other people don't have to go through that. Right. So, it's something that, I'm not answering your question. I'm kind of going off, but, but I don't know if that answers your question.
But I think, Waneek, it also gets to the point that individuals can understand too about Indigenous peoples, is, like you said earlier, about resilience, is that we are resilient people. I may be Mi'kmaq and you're Mohawk, but we have these similar foundations about strength and resilience. We weren't killed when Europeans arrived here. They weren't successful in giving us disease blankets and all of these other things that they did to us. And we continue to fight every single day. And we, sometimes use humor a lot to get through it, but we don't ever give up, and we carry that forward in everything we do. And even I know for trauma that I've experienced, it's the same thing. Lessons that our mothers teach us is you stand strong and you keep your head up high. And yes, there might be moments where you want to give up, and that's okay when you have those little moments, but you gather yourself up again and you always remember your culture and your traditions and where your feet stand, and you live your life by, for us, the 7 sacred teachings. And as long as you have your culture and your value there to guide you, you'll be okay. Or at least that's the teachings that I've heard from my mom, and I know you and I have had conversations about this in the past, as that these foundations have given us.
It's also about, like, you know, that those allyships that I made, not just like, I mean, I can call them allies, but like, you know, I think about that human to human connection that I made with my teammates, and it's particular, like, you know, it's helped me so much. Her friendship helped me understand so much about who I was and what was important to me, and on a human level, and make me a better person. And you would hope that sport, in the end, it's like, yes, you want to win the championship, you want to be the Olympic champion, whatever, but like in the end, you hope you leave your sport a stronger, better, more resilient, positive person. You know, that no matter what role you played or what level you played, that it was a really good, empowering experience that you go into life always going back to. And I believe that sport shouldn't be a place that you feel broken and damaged and hurt. It's just not right. And, you know, there's at a point where I got to a level, now I'm at a level in my sporting life where no one can touch me. I don't want to make any teams. I don't care. So I'm going to say it like it is. I'm going to tell you how we can make it better. And I'm also going to do my best to contribute to the strength of the entire sporting community, but also the academic way we study it, so that when I'm long gone, that people can still go back and read and understand and maybe cite it in their works and all that, and build on it. And I think that's what I hope, is that we're all part of this process, right? And learning little snippets. And from my speech today, you might have gotten 1-2 things that make you go, you know, like, oh, that's interesting, and I want to understand more about that. And that's all I can hope for, right?
Waneek, thank you very much. Walala, it's always a pleasure to have you and to talk with you, and I'm so glad that you were able to make the time to do this discussion with everyone. And hopefully I see you soon, and when I say see you soon, I can give you like a big hug and actually But again, thank you so much for this evening. Before we wrap up, I also have to say thank you to all of the people who helped make this event possible, and that's Natalie and Sherry especially. They provided all the technical support and communication support on this entire 5-session event. And then this evening we also had Jacqueline, who was helping moderate the session. So I just want to give them a big thank you for all of their help, and thank you everyone who participated in all of these sessions. And they have been recorded, so they will be available online for individuals to watch if they weren't able to tune into the live session. So again, thank you, Waneek, Walala, and Monique, and to everyone, have a really good evening.